Gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my new video series, RTS games that I find awesome. I think it's a pretty good and self-explanatory title. I am Ownage Machine of the GeneralsGentlemen, and I'm definitely an RTS guy. I always have been and probably always will. I've played various RTS games in competitive settings, and here on the GeneralsGentlemen we of course shoutcast various RTS games. So this will be my my series here, where I essentially talk about various RTS games that I really enjoy and sort of give my opinions on it. Let's move on to the first game of choice, something that holds a very special place in my heart: Command & Conquer Generals 0 Hour. At first glance, 0 Hour seems like a rather simple RTS game, but it really is the underlying level and depth of all the little quirks and nuances of the abilities and units that give 0 Hour just so much soul and spark. 0 Hour is not an RTS game of strategic or economic depth. It obviously has elements of those, but in comparison to RTS titles, those aspects really are quite shallow. But as a result, there is so much more focus and detail on all of the micro, using your units and abilities to their full potential, and it's just done in such a cool and such a fun way. The problem with the term micro is that a lot of players mistake it for APM, your actions per minute. So people look at a game like StarCraft and its huge esports scene and very top tier players and think, wow, StarCraft has so much micro. Yeah, it kinda does, but it's very unproportionate to the rest of the game. For the most part, StarCraft is a game of production and logistics, of unit composition and strategies and build orders. In order to fuel your production, economy, and spendings, there needs to be a great amount of actions per minute to constantly train new units and buildings, workers and supply and so forth. This leaves very little room and requirement for micro, the finesse control of units. Most of the micro is more of a matter of positioning and concaves, with a little bit of ability use thrown in for good measure. No matter how fantastic your unit micro is, if your other guy's army is twice as big as yours, you're definitely going to lose. Now, this is not at all the case in 0 Hour, and that's its strength. 0 Hour isn't a game about numbers, and there's various reasons why. Firstly, the army sizes of 0 Hour are rather small due to a gated economy, meaning that the economy is regulated at a much shorter amount of time. For example, in StarCraft it takes about 8 minutes or so to build enough workers to optimally harvest a resource node, building up, drones and probes in order to fully mine out a mineral field. In Generals, it takes about 30 seconds to build another truck. This means that the pacing and the army size is rather consistent throughout the game. Losing 3 Battlemaster tanks for nothing would have a significant impact at any stage in the game. In StarCraft, being down 10 Marines at the 5-minute mark will surely result in a swift defeat. Whereas losing 10 Marines at the 25-minute mark, who cares? That's not a big concern. Contrary to what you may think, bigger armies actually means less micro. If there's only 3 units, it means there's a lot of time and ability to maximize their effectiveness in combat. Though if there's 20 units, it's at a scale where it's very, very difficult to actually make micro significant, so it comes down to just more of a matter of which side has the better preemptive positioning and angle. So does this mean to say that any game or situation where there's few units means there will be lots of micro? No, of course not. There needs to actually be gameplay elements and mechanics that allow and reward quirky tricks and characteristics to take place and establish the micro and skill differentiators. In 0 Hour, there are a ridiculous amount of micro techniques that can be applied to each unit and ability in the game. This not only maximizes their effectiveness, but also opens up the possibility for a whole new range of functionality and dynamic. In StarCraft 2, the worker unit collects resources and builds structures. That's pretty much it, other than their rather poor attack damage. In 0 Hour, the worker units have so much more potential. The Chinese trucks can crush enemy infantry or the workers of the GLA, but then the GLA can take garrisons to avoid being crushed, or they can build demo traps and then bait the trucks into the demo trap. There's a lot more they can do. They can also run up to nearby enemy tanks, so then those tanks do friendly fire and end up killing their own units. The USA Chinooks can transport units across the map as early as 30 seconds into the game. So there really is just so much more that can happen if you are clever and creative enough and just have the multitasking to really make use of those potentials. A very iconic unit is the USA Rockv. Rockv being a Humvee garrisoned with the rocket troops to fire out of the Humvee. With this and good micro, the Humvee is very powerful. The Humvee is a weak unit on its own and it will die very fast, but the rocket troops inside of the Humvee have quite a long range and they're able to outrange most infantry and vehicles. So when you combine that with the fast speed of the Humvees, it's able to keep moving outside of the maximum range of the attacking units, but still within range for the rocket troops garrisoned to keep firing. This technique is called kiting. When the Humvee is destroyed, all of the occupants that are garrisoned inside of it will also die unless they are preemptively evacuated before the Humvee is destroyed. So when the rocket troops, or the missile defenders as they're actually called, when they're on the ground, when they're outside of the Humvee, they can fire at nearby units automatically with their auto attacks. But in order to maximize their damage, they have an ability called Laser Lock, another very iconic ability for the Command & Conquer franchise, especially Generals. After a brief delay of about 2 seconds, the rate of fire is then dramatically increased. Laser Lock is very powerful, but if there are multiple vehicles, you need to actually select each missile defender individually and then Laser Lock each vehicle one at a time. Because if you just select all of them and just Laser Lock the same target, you'll overkill. It'll just be destroying that one vehicle, and then by the time you readjust the Laser Lock to the other vehicles, it'll be too late and then they'll already crushed you. So by using various of these techniques, just a single Rockv with delicate micro and control is able to be very cost effective and destroy an entire army on its own. Almost every unit in 0 Hour has similar levels of depth and micro. They're not exactly APM intensive, they're more tactical and creative finesse micro that involves precise timings and execution to pull off. That's what makes 0 Hour so great, so exciting and fun to play and watch, seeing how many sick micro techniques you or your opponent can pull off and to what extent, and seeing how much of an impact that actually makes on the game and the engagements. I think that sums up really why 0 Hour was so awesome, because of how much can be done with each and every single unit. Even the base defenses. The EMP Patriot, for example, is able to temporarily shut down an enemy vehicle with a single rocket, yet it fires 4 rockets in a single volley. So you can actually force fire and manually target the EMP Patriot so that it impacts upon multiple vehicles and shuts them all down. I mean, that's very iconic. What kind of a game gives you micromanagement on your base defenses? That's excellent. Though that being said, the game definitely has its flaws, and not just its absolutely dreadful balance that the game has been left over for years since it was only patched a few times and then abandoned by EA. For example, the sub-faction design is done in a way that removes content from them rather than giving the sub-factions more content. For example, the USA Air Force General gets much stronger aircraft but loses the ability to produce tanks. They don't actually get more air units, they just get ones that are stronger. And then since tanks are taken out of the faction, it means there's a huge gap in the counter system, which often just results in spam or in 1 or 2 unit types, and then it just coming down to entirely micro with no room for hard countering or not much strategy because the options are just so limited. And this happens with so many of the various sub-factions that it actually makes the base core factions more interesting. Even then, with the base factions, some units just really overperform, whilst others underperform, drastically making the matchups quite linear and repetitive. Which again comes back to the point that 0 Hour really isn't a game of strategy, but rather of micro. Whether or not you like that or dislike it, it sure would be nice if there was some deeper and some more varied strategies to complement the micro, and with a counter system that isn't completely dominated by some units just really overperforming and being too versatile without having many weaknesses. This is kind of why us, the Generals Gentlemen, and many 0-hour players prefer to play on the 1.6 community patch, an unofficial patch that addresses and fixes a number of those issues. But unfortunately, that community patch hasn't really taken off, and it's only a small number of people that actually do play that. But that'll wrap up this video. I shall be continuing to carry on this series with whichever RTS titles I think are awesome. So I'll probably be taking a look at Company of Heroes 2 next, or maybe some other CNC games such as Kane's Wrath or Red Alert 3. I also want to have a look at StarCraft and just sort of whichever games I feel like at the time. So thanks for watching, and until next time, I am Ownage Machine of the Generals Gentlemen. Thank you for watching.